The last text message Emma Hale ever sent was a simple heart emoji, bright, weightless, and completely unaware of how quickly love can turn into a locked door. Emma was the kind of woman people described with a smile, as if saying her name automatically warmed the room. 26, newly promoted at a medical office downtown, she moved through life with that steady confidence that comes from doing hard things well. She kept a planner color-coded. She drank her coffee the same way every morning. She called her mother every Sunday, no matter how busy the week had been. And for a while, it looked like her future was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. She lived in a modest rental home on the edge of town with her fiancé, Mark Dalton, 32, charming when he wanted to be, the type who could make strangers laugh in line at the grocery store. When they first met, Mark had talked big, a new career path, a business idea, a promise that he was, finally getting serious. Emma believed him. At first, their days had a rhythm that felt like safety. Emma left early, her heels clicking softly on the porch boards, the air cool against her cheeks. Mark kissed her forehead and told her to have a good day. In the evenings, she'd come home to music drifting from the living room and Mark calling out, "Hey, Em," like everything in the world was normal. But normal has a way of changing one tiny disappointment at a time. The first cracks weren't dramatic. They were quiet. Unpaid bills left on the counter. Laundry piles that never moved. Mark sleeping later and later, saying he was up all night thinking. Emma started carrying the weight of the house the way she carried her work bag, without complaint, because love meant teamwork, right? Except the teamwork was starting to feel like Emma running and Mark watching. His job situation became a revolving door of excuses. One boss was an idiot. One schedule was unfair. One opportunity wasn't worth it. Emma listened, offered solutions, suggested resumes, even set up reminders on his phone. Mark would nod, promise he'd handle it, then drift back to the couch like it was quicksand. And with every week that passed, his frustration seemed to curdle into something sharper. He started making comments that landed like small cuts. "Must be nice to have everyone praising you all the time. Oh, so now you're too good for takeout? Maybe if you didn't nag so much, I'd actually feel like doing anything." Emma tried to laugh some of it off. She tried to choose her words carefully, like stepping around broken glass. But she couldn't ignore the way the air in the house felt heavier now, like the rooms themselves were holding their breath. By early February, the tension was so constant it seeped into everything. Dinners were quiet. Small talk turned into arguments. Even the sound of Emma's keys in the lock seemed to put Mark on edge. One night, Emma stood at the kitchen sink, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The porch light outside cast a pale glow across the glass. Behind her, Mark's voice rose from the living room, complaining about money, about her hours, about how she didn't understand what it was like to feel stuck. Emma closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to survive the conversation without it turning ugly. Then came February 14th. Emma had told a coworker she'd see her in the morning. She'd even joked about how Mark had promised a real date, as if saying it out loud might make it true. That evening, neighbors later remembered the house looking normal, lights on, curtains drawn, the quiet routine of a residential street. But the next morning, Emma didn't show up. Her phone went unanswered. And when the hours began to stack up like bricks, the people who loved her started to feel it, that cold, creeping wrongness that doesn't need proof to announce itself. By afternoon, Mark Dalton made the call that would put his face on every local screen. He told everyone the same thing, in the same steady voice. He said Emma had been asleep when he left. He said he came back, and she was gone. Mark said it calmly, almost casually, as if Emma's disappearance were an inconvenience rather than a nightmare. He told police he'd left for work just after sunrise. Emma, he said, had been sleeping on her side, the blankets pulled up to her shoulders. He hadn't wanted to wake her. When he returned that afternoon, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her purse hung where it always did. Her car sat in the driveway, dust untouched. She must have gone for a walk, he suggested, rubbing his temples. Or met someone. She didn't say. The officers exchanged a glance. People don't usually vanish without shoes, keys, or a phone. Especially not Emma. By nightfall, word spread. Coworkers called. Friends drove by the house. Emma's parents arrived, faces tight with disbelief. Mark met them at the door, eyes red, voice trembling just enough to sound real. "I don't know where she is," he kept saying. "I swear." Search teams fanned out across nearby streets and parks. Flashlights cut through hedges and ditches. Volunteers called Emma's name into the dark, the sound echoing back unanswered. Mark joined them, walking just behind the group, hands shoved into his jacket pockets despite the mild weather. Cameras found him quickly. He stood in front of the house for interviews, shoulders slumped, voice cracking on cue. He talked about Emma's smile. About how excited she'd been for their future. About how he couldn't imagine life without her. What he didn't mention was the argument the night before. Inside the house, detectives began noticing details that didn't quite fit. A chair slightly out of place. A throw pillow missing from the couch. The faint smell of cleaning products, sharp and recent, lingering beneath the softer sense of home. Then there were Mark's hands. An officer noticed it first while Mark signed a form. Thin red lines crossed his knuckles and wrists, half hidden but unmistakable. When asked, Mark shrugged. "Dog scratches," he said. "Happened days ago." Emma didn't own a dog. As the search stretched into a second day, Mark's story stayed rigid, rehearsed. He repeated it word for word, like a script he'd memorized too well. Investigators asked about their relationship. Mark admitted they'd been stressed but insisted things were fine. Friends quietly told a different story. Emma had confided that she felt stuck. That Mark wasn't trying anymore. That she was carrying everything, rent, plans, emotional labor, while he grew resentful. She'd talked about needing space. About possibly postponing the wedding. That detail changed the temperature of the room. Detectives returned to the house with fresh eyes. They noticed how clean the bedroom carpet was, almost too clean. How the trash bins outside were unusually full for a single week. Receipts surfaced from a hardware store, purchased the day after Valentine's Day. Heavy-duty bags. Cleaning supplies. When confronted, Mark bristled. "You're looking at me like I did something," he snapped. "My fiancé is missing, and you're treating me like a criminal." But the mask was slipping. A break came from someone who knew Mark well, someone who'd heard him late at night, voice low, shaking, admitting something he couldn't take back. That person walked into the station with fear written across their face and told detectives everything. The room went silent when they finished. Hours later, officers returned to the house. Mark sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, staring at nothing. When they asked him to come in for more questions, he didn't argue. In the interview room, the lights hummed softly overhead. Mark's confidence drained away minute by minute. His story began to wobble. Timelines shifted. Small details unraveled. Finally, his shoulders sagged. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. And just like that, the truth began to surface, dark, deliberate, and devastating. Outside, Emma's family waited, hoping for a miracle. Inside, investigators realized the search had never been about finding her alive. Mark sat across the table, elbows planted, fingers laced so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with everything he hadn't said yet. An investigator slid a photo across the table, not of Emma, but of Mark's own hands. The scratches were clearer up close. Angry. Recent. Help us understand, the detective said evenly. Because your story doesn't match the evidence. For a long moment, Mark said nothing. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on something bitter. Then his eyes filled, not with tears at first, but with frustration, like a man cornered by his own mistakes. We argued, he muttered. The argument, he said, started over nothing. Dishes. Money. Emma telling him she was exhausted. Telling him she couldn't keep carrying everything alone. According to Mark, her words felt like an attack. Like abandonment. She said she needed space, he whispered. She said maybe we rushed things. His voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with wounded pride. He described how the argument escalated, how voices rose and walls seemed to close in. Emma tried to walk away. Mark followed. The air between them turned electric, sharp with things neither could take back. Then Mark stopped talking. Silence pressed down on the room. Finally, he admitted what happened next, not in detail, not at first. Just the truth stripped bare of excuses. He said he lost control. He said he used his hands. He said when it was over, Emma was still. The words landed like stones. Investigators watched him closely as he spoke, noting what he emphasized, and what he avoided. He never said her name. Never described her face. Never spoke of panic or regret in the moment it mattered most. Instead, he talked about what came after. Mark explained how he stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. He said his mind felt strangely clear. Focused. He decided what he needed to do next with unsettling calm. He cleaned. He went to a store in broad daylight and bought supplies no one questioned. He returned home and wrapped Emma carefully, methodically, as if completing a task instead of facing a loss. He carried her through the front door while neighbors were at work, loaded her into her own car, and drove away without urgency. He chose a wooded area miles outside town, a place quiet enough to disappear into. There, beneath bare branches and winter leaves, he hid her as best he could, covering everything with debris until the forest looked undisturbed again. Then he got back in the car. He drove home. He showered. Changed clothes. Went to work the next day. Answered emails. Made small talk. Acted like a man whose fiancé had simply vanished into thin air. When asked why he didn't come forward sooner, Mark stared at the table. I didn't want to lose everything, he said. For Emma's family, the truth was both a relief and a new kind of agony. Knowing what happened didn't bring her back. And worse, Mark refused to immediately say where she was, forcing search teams to keep looking while he sat in a cell, holding the last piece of the puzzle hostage. Days passed. Then weeks. And somewhere in the quiet woods, Emma waited to be found. The searches continued, even after Mark was taken into custody. Every morning, teams returned to the same stretches of land, scanning tree lines, pushing through brush, calling Emma's name long after hope had thinned into routine. Her family watched it all unfold from the edge of the woods, bundled in coats against the cold, their faces hollowed by exhaustion. They clung to the belief that if they kept looking, if they refused to stop, they could somehow shorten the distance between not knowing and the truth. Mark watched too, from a concrete room with no windows. Investigators pressed him again and again for the location. Each time, he deflected. He claimed he couldn't remember exact turns. That the area all looked the same. That he needed more time. Time he did not deserve. His silence stretched the ordeal into something cruel. Volunteers searched areas he knew were empty. Dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. Every false lead reopened wounds for Emma's parents, her sister, her friends, people who woke each day hoping this would finally be the one. Behind the scenes, detectives worked methodically. They traced Mark's movements through phone data, traffic cameras, fuel receipts. A pattern emerged, one unexplained drive, one gap in the timeline that pointed away from town and toward a dense stretch of woodland bordering an old access road. On a gray morning weeks after Emma vanished, a search team entered that area again. This time, something was different. Branches were piled too deliberately. Leaves were disturbed in a way the forest hadn't done on its own. Beneath layers of debris, investigators found what they'd been dreading, and what they needed. The search stopped. The woods fell silent. When word reached Emma's family, there were no screams, no dramatic collapse. Just a slow, collective breaking, as if the last fragile supports had finally given way. Answers had arrived, but they came with a weight that would never lift. For investigators, the discovery confirmed everything Mark had admitted, and everything he'd tried to control. The case shifted from missing person to confirmed homicide, and the evidence now spoke louder than he ever had. Confronted again, with no leverage left, Mark finally acknowledged the location without resistance. There was no visible relief on his face. No rush of remorse. Just emptiness. The community reacted with a mix of grief and fury. Candlelight vigils filled the park near Emma's workplace. Flowers piled up outside the house she'd shared with Mark, now dark and abandoned. Strangers hugged her parents like family, united by the shared sense that something precious had been taken for no reason at all. As the case moved toward court, details began to surface publicly: the argument, the deception, the performance of grief that had fooled so many. Each revelation felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. Emma was remembered in photos and stories, her laugh, her ambition, the future she never got to live. Mark, meanwhile, prepared to face judgment, not just from the law, but from a world that now saw him clearly. And the man who once stood before cameras pretending to search for his fiancé would soon have nowhere left to hide. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if even the walls understood the gravity of what was about to be said. Emma's family sat together in the front row, hands linked, eyes fixed forward. Behind them, rows filled with strangers, people drawn by disbelief, by sympathy, by the need to understand how something like this could happen so close to home. Mark Dalton entered without drama. He looked smaller than he had on television, stripped of the performance that once made him appear like a grieving partner. Now there were no cameras to play to, no neighbors to convince. Just facts. Just consequences. Prosecutors laid out the timeline piece by piece. The deteriorating relationship. The argument. The lies told afterward. They spoke of his deliberate actions after Emma's death, not with sensationalism, but with precision. The cleaning. The purchases. The drive. The calm return to daily life while search teams worked tirelessly for a woman he already knew would never come home. Witnesses testified quietly. Co-workers spoke of Emma's reliability, of how unlike her it was to disappear. Friends described her growing unhappiness, her fear of confrontation, her hope that things could still be fixed. Investigators explained how Mark's story unraveled under scrutiny, how evidence contradicted performance. Mark did not contest it. He chose to plead guilty. There was no trial spectacle, no dramatic defense. Just an admission that closed the door on doubt while opening a deeper wound for those left behind. In exchange, the court spared them a prolonged legal battle, but nothing could spare them the reality. When it came time for statements, Emma's mother stood, her voice trembling but steady. She spoke of birthdays that would never be celebrated. Of a wedding dress that would never be worn. Of a daughter who trusted someone who claimed to love her. Mark stared at the table. The judge's words were firm, unemotional. A life sentence. Accountability measured not in years, but in the acknowledgement that what was taken could never be returned. As Mark was led away, there was no outburst, no apology that felt sufficient. Just the quiet shuffle of feet and the heavy sound of a door closing. For Emma's family, the verdict brought no relief, only an end to one chapter of pain and the beginning of another. The world moved forward. Seasons changed. Her name slowly faded from headlines. But justice, once delivered, does not always stay where it's placed. Years later, long after the cameras were gone, a new notification would arrive, one that reopened every wound and proved that some sentences echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Years passed in quiet increments, marked not by healing, but by endurance. Emma's family learned how to live with absence. Holidays were rearranged. Conversations avoided certain paths. Her bedroom remained untouched for a long time, as if preserving it could preserve her. They told stories about her carefully, smiling through the ache, determined that her life would be remembered for what it was, not for how it ended. They believed, at the very least, that Mark Dalton would never walk free again. Then came the letter. It arrived without ceremony, a thin envelope carrying words that felt heavier than stone. Mark had been transferred to a lower security facility. Officials cited good behavior, program participation, rehabilitation progress. Language that sounded reasonable on paper, and devastating in reality. Fear returned like a reflex. Emma's parents replayed every detail of the case in their minds. The deception. The calm afterward. The weeks of silence while they searched. The thought that the man responsible could one day move freely through the same world Emma was denied felt unbearable. Public outcry followed, brief but intense. Then, as always, attention drifted elsewhere. Eventually, Mark was released under supervision. No cameras waited this time. No statements were made. He stepped back into society quietly, while Emma remained a memory carried by those who loved her. The imbalance felt cruel, impossible to reconcile. For her family, there was no closure, only vigilance. They adjusted routines. Looked over shoulders. Measured safety in ways they never had before. Justice, they realized, was not a finish line. It was something fragile, subject to change. Emma's name no longer trended. Her case became a cautionary story, shared in hushed tones and online forums. But to the people who knew her laugh, her determination, her kindness, it was never just a story. It was a life interrupted by control, entitlement, and rage. And while time moved forward, one truth remained unmoved: Emma Hale should still be here. Her future was stolen, but her story endures, not as a tale of disappearance, but as a reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it lives quietly, right at home.